October 2nd, 2020. Alyssa was shot and brutally stabbed to death near the Green Tree Apartments. The scene was chaotic. Police cars, ambulances, blood. She had been sitting in her car when the shooting occurred, and violence was evident as handprints were left behind. At once, the police targeted Andrew Beard. He was her ex-boyfriend. Alyssa had always feared he would kill her, and it turned out she was right. So, detectives didn't waste any time making Beard their prime suspect. The crime was brutal, which made it feel personal, like it came from all the history of bad blood between Alyssa and him. For a while, it seemed like the police had it figured out. But as the investigation went deeper, it became clear that Beard wasn't the whole story. Was there anyone else in it? If yes, why killing Alyssa Burkett all of a sudden? What are the stories that no one ever got to know about them? Questions were many. And answers? Let's find out. On the morning of the murder, at about 9 a.m., Alyssa pulled into her usual parking spot near her workplace, the Carrollton apartment complex. Right at that moment, not far behind her, a black Ford Expedition pulled up. To everyone's shock, the shooter got out with a gun, walked right up to Alyssa's car, and shot through the window, hitting her badly. Darren Ickler, the maintenance supervisor, was nearby and heard the gunshot. He saw the SUV speeding away right after. Investigators believe that the shooter thought Alyssa was dead after the gunshot, as the bullets completely destroyed her left eye and partially destroyed her face. Alyssa, however, even with the horrific injuries, managed to get out of the car and started walking in the direction of a landing, hoping to get the help of her co-workers. The scene was devastatingly nightmarish. But again, the shooter, who is described as a black man, followed her. This time he had a big hunting knife and attacked her again, stabbing her several times as she tried to reach out for help. She even left a bloody smear on the window from her desperate attempts. Even though Alyssa was fighting back, the perpetrator ran off. Finally, as it seemed the danger was passing, her co-workers, who had been terrified to run out of the building as they believed the shooter had escaped, ran to help. They called 911 reporting the shooting and the fleeing man. When the emergency responders arrived, they did everything they could, but it was too late. They were unable to save Alyssa. After that deadly bullet wound, she had been stabbed and slashed 44 times. Alyssa's mother, Teresa, immediately pointed a finger of guilt at Andrew Beard, naming him as the responsible individual when she contacted the police. She described him as pure evil. The conflict between Alyssa and Andrew began when she became pregnant. Andrew requested to have full custody of Willow Anne, their daughter, but Alyssa shot that request down, thinking he was just kidding. Basically, Alyssa and Andrew were very different from the start. Andrew, almost a decade older, had a solid career, a nice house, and even a plane, while Alyssa, at just 22, was still figuring things out. Their brief relationship ended up with Alyssa getting pregnant. Finally, Alyssa learned that she was carrying a girl, named the baby Willow Anne, and gave birth on July 23rd, even though she had joint custody with Andrew. He was still fighting for full custody, dragging her into court again and again, which drained her finances. On top of this, Alyssa was afraid for Willow's safety. Andrew had more money and stability, and that terrified her. Andrew's mom, Lizette, always said he was a loving guy who just wanted to give Willow a stable life and show her more of the world. But for Alyssa, it didn't feel that simple. Then, in March 2020, things seemed to settle for a moment. Willow was 8 months old, and after a long, ugly court battle, Alyssa and Andrew finally agreed on visitation and child support. For a few weeks, everything seemed to be fine. Alyssa was dating a new man, Ben, and Andrew began dating a woman named Holly Elkins. Lizette quickly took a shine to Holly, saying she was charming and full of energy, basically easy to like. Alyssa thought perhaps Holly's influence might calm Andrew down over time, because Holly even texted Alyssa saying she wanted everyone to get along, which Alyssa took as a good sign. But just when things looked like they were going in the right direction, he made a sinister move. Andrew was hostile all of a sudden, wanted full custody again, dragged Alyssa to court all over again, and even started to behave rudely and aggressively. As a result, Alyssa found herself getting increasingly paranoid and unsafe again. Alyssa also got a feeling that Andrew must be tracing her, It was as if he knew where she was at all times, what she was doing. She went out one time to a bar in downtown Dallas with a friend and texted her family, "Oh my gosh, Andrew is here." That really made her wonder how he was keeping tabs on her, but no matter how much she tried, she couldn't figure out how he was doing it. Alyssa's life had become a nightmare. It felt like she was always being watched, like there was someone lurking just behind her, waiting for the right moment to strike. This constant pressure, along with that of the custody battle, was starting to wear her out on an emotional and psychological basis as well. And just weeks before her terrible murder at the end of September 2020, things get even worse. A man named Frank Marrow phoned 911 and said Alyssa was selling drugs from her car trunk while she was working. He said he had seen what he thought was a drug deal going down between a Toyota Corolla and gave the police the license plate number. It just added another layer of legal trouble to an already tense and unstable situation. Pressure continued to mount on Alyssa. Word finally reached the Carrollton police, and they went to the leasing office of the Green Tree Apartments to confront Alyssa. They asked for her car keys, opened the trunk of her car, and as Frank had described it, found drugs, a gun, and cash inside. Alyssa was horrified. She feared she would be arrested and lose her job until the police questioned her. The authorities soon realized she knew nothing of the stuff that was inside the trunk. They realized that drugs and a gun had been planted in that trunk. Alyssa believed Andrew Beard had set her up. That night took Alyssa's fear to a whole new level. She texted her roommate, Shelby, saying, "He is going to try to get someone to kill me next." People who knew her were shocked by the message. Alyssa wasn't the type to be scared of much, so these texts made it clear how serious her fear had become. She also texted her sister, Madison, reminding her to lock the door when she got home and to keep an eye out for anyone who may have been lurking in the shadows. So things started getting pretty intense, and it was obvious that Andrew was not just trying to frame Alyssa anymore. His behavior was becoming more aggressive, and people close to her began fearing the worst. The police, on the other hand, started zeroing in on Andrew as the prime suspect, and then just a month later, Alyssa was found dead. So, it didn't take very long for the police to figure out that Andrew had had a hand in her death. He was the killer of this girl. And worse still, during the time he committed this brutal act, he was legally entitled to visit Willow sometimes. Alyssa's parents were extremely worried about this child's safety. Now they feared that Andrew may kill Willow as well. Alyssa's mom, Teresa, was horrified, especially since Andrew had been with Willow on the same day Alyssa had died. Quite soon after Alyssa's death, the cops were pulling Andrew over for violating traffic. He was driving his F-150 truck with his fiancée, Holly Elkins, and their daughter sitting in the back seat. The police interrogated him. Since he still had visitation rights, Andrew took Willow with him to a hotel. However, the police took his truck and told him not to return home. But later on, when they searched Andrew's house, they found some pretty shocking evidence. In the living room, they found a backpack with an envelope full of notes. These notes seemed to be about a 911 call that Frank Marrow had made, accusing Alyssa of selling drugs. Even the notes contained details about Alyssa's car, including license plates, colors, and models. And they also discovered a GPS tracking device similar to the one that was discovered on Alyssa's car, showing that Andrew was indeed following all her moves as part of this nutty custody battle. The more the cops dug into Andrew Beard's F-150, the creepier things got. They found a makeup vial labeled Java, which looked like it was used to darken someone's skin, probably to make Andrew look like an African American. But that wasn't all. They also found a knife sheath at the scene, but the knife and gun were nowhere to be found. Then, it was discovered that the very next day after the murder, Andrew had purchased a black SUV, which he discarded less than a mile from his house. Security footage recorded him running away from the scene as if stumbling through the neighborhood after getting rid of the car. When the police inspected the SUV, they found bloodstains all over, later confirmed to be of Alyssa. They also discovered a fake beard, almost like something you wear for Halloween, which was quite a big clue. At this point, the police issued an arrest warrant for Andrew Beard. At the time, Andrew was staying at an Airbnb with his fiancée, Holly Elkins, and his mom, Lizette, and he had Willow with him. As soon as he heard they were coming for him, He gave Willow back to Teresa and turned himself in 3 days after Alyssa's death. Holly was entirely convinced of Andrew's innocence initially and worked with the police but insisted that he had an alibi. She said he was home with her when the murder occurred. The detectives, however, were pretty sure that he had left the house at that time. Holly and Lizette kept supporting Andrew, and they became even closer as the investigation continued. During this time, Andrew was brought out on bail. But surprisingly, Holly, who had vowed to stand by him, just suddenly disappeared the day before Andrew's return. Her departure set some alarm bells ringing, and the investigation continued, especially related to Willow's safety. Then, things turned completely another way. The police discovered an unregistered silencer in Andrew's house, and so the detective requested the involvement of the federal government in taking over the case, following federal firearms laws. 8 days later, Andrew was rearrested. It was simple: keep him locked up forever. This time, Andrew Beard was charged with some very heavy crimes: cyberstalking with a deadly weapon that resulted in murder. And almost 1.5 years after the murder of Alyssa Burkett, Andrew dialed up his mom with some mind-blowing news. He was going to plead guilty. His mother initially did not believe him. She was convinced that there was no way her son could do such a thing. He didn't have it in his character, she was thinking. But it later became true that Andrew confessed he did it indeed. That is, killing Alyssa Burkett. He called it a heinous, awful, out-of-character, broken moment. Even though Andrew confessed to the crime, the investigation continued. With time, he began talking to the FBI and provided them with some pretty crucial information that indicated the murder was not a spur-of-the-moment thing. It was planned. This didn't fit the original notion that it was a heat-of-the-moment thing. As part of his plea deal, Andrew gave up more information that started pointing fingers at the people around him. Meanwhile, things were getting fishy with Holly Elkins also. After Alyssa's death, Holly went back to Michigan about 2.5 weeks later, without giving anyone any real answers. Her childhood friend, Stephanie Goddard, spilled the beans that Holly never brought up Alyssa or Andrew during the time they hung out after she got back. Instead, Holly was living it up with a new condo, a shiny new Lexus, and a new boyfriend. Stephanie said that Holly had always been pretty good at playing the cat-and-mouse game with guys, always in control of her relationships. Meanwhile, back in Texas, things were starting to heat up in the investigation of Holly. It didn't take much time for the investigators to know that her public grief was not as real as they thought. She would make these tearful performances, talking about how devastated she was over Alyssa's death, even saying things like, "I've literally cried myself to nausea every single night over this." But the more she went on about it, the more the investigators started thinking it was all an act. But her performance raised some serious questions about whether she also had a hand in the murder of Alyssa. Turned out that Holly never really liked Alyssa. It was clear from the way she spoke about her constantly belittling her, calling her ugly, fat, and a lousy mom, though none of that was true. She even had the nerve to save Alyssa's name in her phone as baby mama, but in the nastiest way possible. Why? Well, Holly was jealous. She wanted the life Alyssa had, especially the family stuff. And more than anything, she wanted Alyssa's relationship with Willow. Alyssa was blocking Holly's dream of having the perfect family with Willow in her mind, and that obsession was eating her up. Andrew also shared a little insight about his relationship with Holly. According to him, Holly called the shots. She made all the decisions on when something occurred and how it happened, and even was involved in a dirty drug plan. Holly could manipulate people too. She even tried to get Alyssa's mom, Teresa, into jail. The tension peaked one day when Teresa and Alyssa drove past Holly and Andrew's place because they were supposed to get Willow back, but she wasn't there on time. Teresa saw Holly on a golf cart with Willow in her lap, and when she got out to take Willow back, Holly freaked out and called the cops. When the police came, Holly declared that Teresa had hurt her when she forcibly took Willow away from her. She even showed cops scratch marks on her arms indicating that it was Teresa, but Teresa wasn't having that, saying she was making it all up. The cops also did not like the story much either. Some even thought the scratches resembled something Holly had caused herself. But Holly didn't just stop there. She took things to the next level with Andrew. Holly was calling the shots, pushing Andrew to prove he was loyal to her no matter what, even if it meant doing some seriously messed up things. She kept telling him to protect her and their kid at all costs. On the other hand, Andrew, tired and emotionally drained, eventually gave in to all that Holly wanted and did, as she said, nearly a week and a half before Alyssa's murder. Even after Holly was gone to Mexico, however, she was not quite finished pulling the strings from afar. She continued messaging Andrew, reminding him of what she wanted from him. One message, just 1 week before the murder, left no room for doubt about whether he was all in or out. After Alyssa was murdered, Andrew opened up regarding how Holly wanted to know all the details of the crime, even asking him to describe it while they were in bed together, which made him feel beyond humiliated. In May 2023, Andrew finally got hit with a 43-year sentence in federal prison. At first, people thought Holly wasn't really involved, but as the investigation went on, they realized just how deep she was in it. She was arrested in Miami after coming back from the Dominican Republic. The FBI had gathered some serious evidence, like phone records showing she was looking up tracking devices and proof she bought the ammo and knife used in the murder. She even had a plan to make Andrew look like someone else by covering his face with dark makeup during the crime. Holly was charged with conspiracy to stalk and stalking, using a dangerous weapon that led to a death. Andrew Beard seemed harmless at first, at least in the video footage that was shown later. But behind that innocent appearance, he was the one responsible for Alyssa Burkett's brutal murder. Later, Andrew sought to justify his actions by saying that he killed Alyssa in mercy, assuming she was still alive but suffering and that he was doing her a favor by ending her pain. However, since Andrew was not the only one involved, Holly Elkins, who was a party to the crime, was tried in April 2024 for her role. In court, prosecutors portrayed her as a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Even Detective Harding was quoted as saying that Holly was the mastermind of the operation, and Andrew was merely an obedient follower. And the investigation made it clear that if Andrew and Holly had never crossed each other's paths, probably Alyssa would probably still be alive today. The trial was for a week, and only after 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Holly guilty. She was given 2 life terms, more years than Andrew received for murder. Meanwhile, Andrew and Alyssa's daughter, Willow Anne, was just a little girl who had to learn how to live without her mom. As Willow grows up, she'll eventually find out the full story of what happened to her mom and how she had to lose both her parents. So what do you think of this tragic story? Who do you think is the more guilty here, Andrew or Holly? Drop your views in the comments. And to watch more gut-wrenching, thrilling true crime story, click on this one. Subscribe to the channel for more. See you soon.